This session is how is Red Cross working to play its part in closing the gap? Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we are meeting today and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge them all for the continuation of their strengths and cultures and languages. I am a Tiwi, Narrabeen, Gamadji man. I currently am living in Darwin. I was based here in Melbourne, but had to go home for family reasons. Today, we have four wonderful speakers who will talk to you about what we're doing and importantly, how we should go about working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. We've heard today a great deal of working with in a complex world and the need for us to find new ways of working if we're able to have any impact in turning around the unacceptable health and economic outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in our communities. Today our speakers will discuss how Red Cross can respectfully and genuinely work in this space to play its part and close the gap. Our speakers who have given their time up to be part of today's discussions, and importantly, I believe each and one of them will be speaking to you from their heart, no doubt, not just from a career perspective, but from a living experience in today's society. Our first speaker is Mr. Michael White. I refer to him as Michael Black. It's quite interesting. I met Michael 16 years, probably 10, 12, 14 years ago. Michael's background has been working extensively in Aboriginal affairs, and where I came across and met Michael for the first time, I was an ADSIC commissioner for the northern part of the Northern Territory, and Michael was the regional chair for Rocky. And my first impression of Michael when we met in Canberra was a very serious, this is a very serious man. Not only because he dressed very smartly, but he was a thinker and somebody who really wanted to engage with society, but importantly for the benefits of his peoples. The other speakers we have got, Michael and myself, three beautiful ladies, Aboriginal ladies, and that we'll then have Liz Allen, who will speak. We all know Nicole Jenkins, for those within Red Cross. Those who aren't with Red Cross, Nicole is a National Manager for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Employment and Retention. And don't be fooled by her size or her looks. She is a very courageous, wonderful human being, but importantly a very proud Aboriginal woman, like the two other Aboriginal ladies we've got up here. And finally, our final speaker in this session will be Miss Olga Havnen, and many of you know Olga. So what I will do, I won't introduce them, I'll let them introduce themselves on the basis I'm from a different tribe, I'm from a different nation, so they will introduce themselves rather than me introducing them. So our first speaker is Mr. White. I was going to say Black, but select Michael Black.
Hi. Let's see this work.
Glad you're here, mate. Glad you're here.
Yeah, so if you just, is that it?
That's the one, mate.
Cool. And there's your...
Thank you. So have some. Rightio. Okay. Thank you, Kim, for that new nickname. But interesting, a bit of humour in one of my previous roles, working in sport and recreation, and I was working with organisations and that might receive funding. And I remember liaising with a croquet club in Mackay about sporting funds, and I made a meeting with them, and it was at 7 o'clock at night, and I rocked up at Mackay croquet club, and here's all these elderly people sitting in there, and I come to the door and they looked up at me, and you should see some of the looks I got. And then I just said, my name's Michael White. Then it was, "Oh, you're Michael White." But just realising, oh, well, they probably were speaking with a white person over the phone, but then a black man turns up to talk to them. So it was interesting, a lot of those years ago. But personally, I'd just like to acknowledge and also pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people from the Kulin Nation, and also acknowledgement of the elders, past and present, of this nation, and also the elders of the country present now. So very, as I was saying, it's one of those formal things that we really do, and it's really it's a protocol. And if I didn't do that, I'm sure my grandmothers would make sure, they give me a good swift kick up the bum about not doing those sort of things. But also I'd like to acknowledge some of my Aboriginal colleagues that have travelled from all over the country, and also colleagues of Red Cross in general. So my speech, firstly for me, I'm from, traditionally my country is the Yiman country, which is in the central Queensland area. I'm born and bred in Rockhampton. I do reside in Cairns now, a beautiful part of the world. And I've had a wonderful journey professionally of working in different spaces, and now, my journey is continuing with Red Cross, which I've been in this organisation now for a bit over 2.5 years. So I'm starting to become a long-termer, by they say after 2 years. But I'm really enjoying the experience and the opportunity, and very humbled by the opportunity that Red Cross has given me, and the opportunity to engage not only just around Aboriginal issues and Torres Strait Islander issues, but generally the issues around society and what this organisation is seeking to do across all our societies. So it's being a humbling experience, and I hope that, my contribution as a small part, that it's just one of those journeys that helps this organisation get to where it wants to be. And so I'll leave it at that. But it's a humbling and a very privileged position that I sit in the sense that I get to look at the organisation through three different lenses professionally. And those are, as a regional manager, I sit, in Cairns looking after the region, and obviously in Cairns, in that space in the far north Queensland, the contact with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is fairly high, and and at the end of the day, the most vulnerable, as we know, are those sort of people that, and and I'm seeing that day in, day out. So, and my staff and volunteers, work with those people with that nature. So I get to see the organisation at a regional level, and that allows me to participate at a state level and to look at strategically where Queensland's going. And the other privileged hat I get to wear in this organisation is the co-chair of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander leadership team. And that gives me the ability to see the organisation at a national level. So I sit, and I think for me, that is a unique situation that I'm in, and I'm very, as I say, humbled by that, and I'm fairly cherish that and look after that, because those opportunities don't come along very often. Okay, so when I'm speaking there, I'm looking through those three lenses at different times sometimes, so forgive me if I do go off track a little bit. But I'm really looking forward to the conversation with you guys. At the end of the day, it might be presenting, but it's more about a conversation, and hopefully we can continue this conversation and take Red Cross into a good space, working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Okay, right. Let's see how we go with this. If I mess it up, forgive me now. Okay, just a statement, and this is obviously the Australian Red Cross's statement back in 2008. And obviously it's it doesn't work here. It's it goes without saying, as I say, the disadvantages, and if Red Cross is going to be working in this area, the contact with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is constant. It's inevitable, which is unfortunate, but that's something that, whilst we're in that space, the thing about we're looking at is Red Crosses, and obviously I know some of my other presenters here will cover some of that, and particularly Olga, around this capacity about how we get Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the space on equal level playing field with us, you know, in terms of what this organisation wants to do. So it's going to... Oh, there you go. So just in the national context, there's been a number of policies and frameworks put in place, and this is the journey Red Cross has gone on, you know, and I keep referring to the organisation as 100 years old as we are. We're still very young working in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander place, even though over probably decades Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have accessed the service of Red Cross. But going back, I think from 2005, you know, when predecessors came in and started the platform, the journey, and putting Red Cross on this journey about getting better positioned as an organisation and understanding how best we can meet the needs or the aspirations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So this journey, and obviously there's, like every journey, yeah, a couple of steps forwards, and sometimes you have to go back to go forwards. So certainly in my short experience in the couple of years, I've seen that with Red Cross also. But the intent of putting these sort of frameworks together, you know, and the will and the intent, you know, is there. It's something that I'm very excited about since I've been in this organisation, and you know, being involved in some of the how now is even more exciting in terms of that. So you can see there's a bit of a journey there, and a lot of and don't get me wrong too, I don't think I've seen half of these documents too. So, but the reality is, you know, there was people that were careful about how they wanted to bring working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait people and how they wanted to bring Red Cross into that space. So there was a lot of thought and that journey is continuing. So as you can see, and just on that 2009, you know, I think it's been vindicated, and I know we talked about with the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Employment Retention Strategy, and I know Nicole will probably cover that, and I hope you don't steal too much thunder from you, mate. But, you know, like, I think it's 140 odd, or maybe 150 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people across the nation are working in Red Cross. You know, and certainly in my part of the world, we're encouraging volunteers to come into that space. And, you know, I'm fortunate enough I've got two of those volunteers that are down here experiencing, you know, what Red Cross as an organisation is. So, you know, the growth there, and it's been vindicated in terms of the award. And I'll let the youth talk about that if you wish. But certainly, again, and not just people that are on the ground, it's people... I get the opportunity to sit at this level, and the Kims and the likes, so it's been fantastic watching that growth happening in this space. More policy statements, and I think the you know, the next stage of the 2020 strategy, and there's been a lot of talk about, you know, the priority of where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people sit in that, you know, space. And certainly there is, you know, there's been advocating very strongly about how we actually make sure the journey that we've started through this policy work, and also the work on the ground, how we actually continue that journey to ensure it's not forgotten about. And I can say this, if it is forgotten about, we're going to be just the same old organisation that's come along and thought that, you know, we could do really well, and it got a little bit hard, then we left it in the shelf a bit more, we walked away from it. And I think, you know, going forward in the next 5 years, if you think that, you know, that it's very important, because a lot of the groundwork that's been established over the last decade is really, I think it's going to come to the fore, and the opportunities for us as an organisation to make some positive impacts in terms of how we, you know, work with the mob is going to be very important in the next 5 years, I believe. So this journey, and one of the key things on this journey, and it's been great to see, is that obviously people have been aware of the cultural competence framework, and for the first time in my professional career, I've seen in an organisation where we had black and white staff sitting down together, going through a train-the-trainer cultural competence course, because I think where organisations have failed in the past, anything that comes with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander title on it, it's always referred to the black staff. They'll do it. And it's unfortunate, because that's where a lot of pressure is put on staff that way, because you become the be-all and end-all in that organisation. And the best thing about sitting on that cultural competence was about sharing that, and then where, with learning and development business partners, it was really great to sit there and actually get on the same page about how we're going to deliver this, because at the end of the day, if we're going to leave it just for the black staff to do it, then the organisation's not going to learn anything, and the work that we will do will only be in isolation and sporadic. And we've got a wonderful opportunity just by that little measure of us sitting together in a training environment, us sitting together, we've got a great opportunity to walk together and to make sure, we get the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, experiencing the world of what Red Cross has got to offer, and what Red Cross experienced the world of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from a positive perspective rather than a negative one. The fundamental principles, I know it was something that, it was highlighted in our first day, the first session yesterday, and it's something that this what really separates us as an organisation in working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Those fundamental principles there are key, and particularly the neutrality, independence, those areas, impartiality, they really resonate with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's what drew me straight away. When I saw those principles, those two things popped into my head and they stuck in my head straight away. And as we're saying, to use, and particularly I know with the Indigenous staff, I bet you when they're out in the ground, those fundamental principles, they use those principles, because it's going to help them navigate the complexities of those communities. So I suppose I just wanted to reiterate that that's what's going to separate us from the rest, from just that point of view. I just want to talk this was done through the state of Queensland, and then obviously I'm going to talk about our region, but from back in 2009 there was a decision about, we had these emergency medical accommodation centres, a bed for the night basically, and nothing much else, and people coming from rural and remote communities wherever in Queensland are going to these accommodation centres. As you can see there's two accommodation centres, one's in Colomulla, and that's the new one we as Red Cross have in Cairns now. And so you can see the differences in what we're trying to lift the standards, I suppose, and about quality and about how we do treat people when they do come into our space. Wellbeing model, as we talked about, and this is a journey we're going on. How's that look? There's a whole array of models that could be out there, but for us, we're saying it's just about, affordability and the quality of it. Personal wellness takes centre stage of it. And it is a quality healing and environment. So we can't do anything medically directly, but we can do things socially and in how we interact with people and what we can provide for people whilst they're staying with us. So that's our thing there. And obviously, when people do come from those rural and remote communities, or it's hard. It's hard enough just getting into the bigger cities and understanding the lay of the land, and that's about making sure when people are staying with us, we're connecting them with what's happening in the Cairns space, and so whether that's taking them to Centrelink or getting Centrelink to come into us, remote housing coming to us and talking about those needs, we'll do those sort of things to make sure people are not just sitting down in Cairns and being alone. It's very central to that. The the Cairns Wellbeing Centre, it's a 44-bed facility. It's en-suited. 6 of those rooms are disability rooms, and 6 are a little bit larger, just for larger families. Not real large families for Aboriginal, as we know, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but certainly we are working towards that. But it is, and then the other thing under the uniqueness about this facility is we have a number of elements of Red Cross sitting under the one roof. So we have regional staff sitting under in the regional office. We have the branch that has an office under that one roof, and they participate in activities within the centre with the guests, and they're very much included in what we do in that centre. We have, what they do is they run a little kiosk. They're all, the facilities is well positioned in terms of where Cairns is. It's right in the heart, and it's right across the road from the major hospital and also the major oncology unit, which makes it very accessible for people to stay with us and then accessing those facilities. And of course, it's named in the honour of Pat Gosper, who is a lady of 93 years young and still participates in branch meetings and still sharp-minded and has a bit of wit. So when I do step out of line, she does let me know. I can tell you that. And we'll see a photo of Pat coming up. But it's wonderful to see people like her, the pioneers, that are still participating, and, you know, to give us an opportunity to have a facility of this nature. You know, you got to pay, you got to humble respects to people like Pat. That's a facility at night, a bit like a Christmas tree, as some of the mobs say. And that's one of the key things about working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait people. Before we opened this facility up, we called it a respect and recognition opening. So we had the traditional owners come in with a ceremony, a welcome ceremony and a smoking ceremony, and it was very important to put that in place straight away so that people from the communities knew that the place had good spirits in it, rather than obviously coming to a place where negativity and bad spirits, and, you know, and that's still very real up in the Cairns space with people in those Cape communities. So that's a photo, actually the photo's there, that's Pat there with the traditional owner dancers when we had the respect and recognition opening. Here's some of the partners that we're working with, the Indigenous organisations and communities. I won't go through, but it's certainly the need for emergency services, first aid training. You know, they're crying out for those sort of stuff. So it's something that we've just started we had a first aid training, an emergency services training in a community called Jumbin, which is about 20k, or it's near Tully, and it was affected when any of the floods or cyclones happen. It's a community that can be forgotten, and it has been forgotten, and we're wanting to make sure the next one, when it comes along, if anything, which was probably inevitable that another disaster will come along in the far north, but we're making sure that these community are, you know, they've got the capacity to look after themselves for such, you know, short period of time whilst other help comes along. And I know I've just been given the wrap up here. Sorry, Kerry. And look, just quick photos. There's a Jumbin. There's some of the programs we're doing and working with people and trying to build the capacity of them to be, you know, more resilient, and rather than relying on what we're trying to do for them. Life skills program, I won't go too into it, but it was about making sure it's all, you know, when people come into our facility, there's a number of activities that we run, and the life skill program has been an important part of that, so that we are trying to build capacity of individuals for any period that to stay with us. So it's need-based, person-centred, solution-focused, strengths-based, very important. That's a conversation we need to continue about strength-based conversations, not deficit-based conversations. Let's get away from that. As an organisation, we have the ability to lift that conversation into the strengths, into that area, and that's one thing I'd advise our organisation to do. That would be it. Just some of the way we do it, the business, the outcomes we're looking for. That's just an activity for the week. So it's about education and awareness, and also actually doing things. And there's some of the photos of our people in the activities. And we have an aquaponic growing, so fresh fruit, fresh veggies for people to access. And just the partners that we do that come into our facility to do working with guests, a mixture of Indigenous and non-Indigenous partners. And I'd just like to thank you. Sorry, sir.
Thank you, Michael. Our next two speakers is Liz Allen. Liz is a Wurundjeri woman and has extensive employment service backgrounds for over 20 years, including in senior HR and executive roles in the corporate and the community sector. Followed by Liz's presentation, we'll have Nicole Jenkins. She's worked for the Red Cross. She is the Red Cross National Manager for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Workforce Engagement and has worked in Indigenous employment for over 15 years. She has deeply demonstrated a commitment to empowering people through employment. Welcome both speakers. Liz, you want to go first?
Good morning, everyone. How exciting were some of those programs that Red Cross have? Are you excited to work with Red Cross and know some of those things that are supporting our mob out there in every state? It's fantastic. Well done, guys. It would be Alan, yeah. Perfect. Who's from Victoria? Hands up. Yay. Okay, good. It's all right. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the nation, my elders, past and present. I'm actually a descendant of the Djadjarung mob as well, so the grounds that we meet on today are Wurundjeri and also the Bendigo area for people that know Victoria really well, the Goldfields area, I guess. I'd like to, done the acknowledgement, pay my respects to the elders in the room and also Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people that gather here today. Perfect. I wanted to come into this session talking about, I guess, community and strengthening partnerships with community and how effective you guys can be on the ground and in other levels as well. And encourage you guys to source and network with your communities to better, I guess, some of the stats that we've got around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health, education, training, and life expectancy, which I think we might cover off a bit later as well. So why have an Aboriginal employment strategy? Does anybody want to start the conversation around why maybe Red Cross will have an Aboriginal employment strategy? Somebody has to? Yeah. Good. Yeah. Do you know the recent stat, 6 out of 10 non-Aboriginal people have not met or come in contact with an Aboriginal person as well. So I'm getting a few nods saying that's pretty much across the board. Learn about humanity needs. We all need to breathe, eat, speak, and we've all got cultural differences. It's about celebrating that cultural difference and that diversity and also inclusion. From an organisation's business case, it's really important to have a transparent approach. And I know these guys have worked tirelessly in trying to embed that into Red Cross, and hopefully you get something out of today that you can take with you to work. Some of the examples of why people have an Aboriginal employment strategy: diversity and inclusion. Companies want to represent the communities that they serve in every culture. I had this yesterday, actually yesterday or the day before. A company said, I want to do it because my competitors are doing it. Is that a reasonable, yeah? Was that, no? Yeah, okay. Some companies, if we think of major land management companies, they will have a federal government responsibility around engagement and employment of Aboriginal people. Reflecting the community you serve, mentioned that, and social and community responsibilities. Where do you think Red Cross fit? Yep, definitely. And I believe from my time working with people in the Red Cross, that is the strong emphasis and focus that comes through, which is fantastic. So, just a little bit about some of the organisations that I've worked in. I've worked for about 20 years in the Indigenous training and employment space. I've worked for many corporate organisations. and really just around some of the strategies you can take from a higher level approach, but also I'm a person that works from the ground up. So my passion comes from working with my community out on the cold face and making sure that there's a link to the corporates that have those employment strategies. There's an absolute hidden talent pool of candidates out there that I see every day walk through my door. And all they're looking for is an opportunity to work just like everybody else. So next time when HR are recruiting, I think you'll talk about that as well. So I believe it's a strong emphasis with HR. And supporting our younger generation. You know, we have our population currently, I don't know what the exact stats are, but 70% of our population is under the age of 24. We have 4% of Aboriginal people over 60 years old. So our elders are depleting as well, unfortunately. Some of the organisations, has anyone worked for any organisations that have Aboriginal employment strategies before? Yeah? Do you know any of these? No? Who wants to say a company? Whoops. Woolworths? Yep. I've actually been working across Woolworths in Victoria for about 3.5 years. We've employed over 100 people in the retail sector, making a huge difference to communities. So, there's a lot of different companies for different reasons that have strategies. Just a bit of information there. And research suggests that the greater understanding of culture is an important step in reducing racism experienced, improving how valued Indigenous Australians feel. And we're all just part of that, making people feel comfortable. Cultural competency, very, very important. Hands up who's actually done any cultural competency along their journey. Good. Awesome. Great. Because I'm sure you would have taken some of those learnings from there and implemented it in your daily lives as well. A better understanding of family kinship and our systems, not just dealing with one person, often you're dealing with a whole community. What else is there? Important to note, you have an Aboriginal employee. This was touched on before. If you have an Aboriginal employee in your location or your site, they're not the expert in everything. We try to be, but we're not, and we do get lots of pressure. So take that, I guess, willingness to learn and hopefully be empowered today to do some more. I know Red Cross have done a little bit of this. Around our family kinship and our strengthening community, we have some challenges around sorry business or bereavement leave. I know a lot of corporates now, and I know Red Cross have done this, have actually changed the bereavement leave to actually incorporate significant others in the family linkages. So that's obviously one of the significant barriers or challenges that we've had in regards to attendance, given that we have a lot of sorry business during the years. So very good. Mentoring, that's a really strong focus on mentoring. Mentoring doesn't have to be another Aboriginal person. It can be anyone internally. But I would encourage any external partners as well to come in and help. The retention of, I guess we track usually people at 6 months of the journey with any employer, and we're getting an 80% retention rate across lots of industries, which is almost higher than the general average. So it's fantastic. Having resources like elders and members, working groups. I've been to a couple of yarning circles at Red Cross for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal staff. They've been amazing. Thank you. I'll talk all day, but anyway. Career pathways, and I know Nicole's going to tap on some of this as well in regards to, not just entry-level jobs. We're talking about senior-level jobs, and I think in Red Cross you've got tiers of people in every different element of where you work. So I think that's a really good emphasis to focus on, that there are a lot of skilled Aboriginal people out there. Perfect. Excellent. How you guys can make a difference. There's a few little tips up there if you want to take those. I'm getting the wrap up. So thank you very much for listening, and hopefully you've got something out of that presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. For those who might not know, one of the things when Aboriginal people are doing presentations, I mean, whilst we may work for an organisation with our backdrops, Liz actually works down at the Richmond Football Club. No, she didn't say that. I just picked this up just then because you can see the Richmond colours. And myself, and I need to apologise for my other family members in the room, I said who I was from my father's side. My mother's side's actually Wanyi, which is Lawn Hill in the Gulf of Carpentaria, but my mother's also from Lake Eyre, the Arabunda. So sorry, Auntie Fiona and the family from Port Augusta. I didn't mention my mother's side. But just want to make the point, when we're doing, a lot of Aboriginal people, when they're doing presentations, the colours, backgrounds and stuff does make an association. And I love the Richmond Football Club mainly because my local team on the Tiwi Islands is called Imlu Tigers, and we were founded by the late great Morris Rioli. So red and green. So the next speaker is Nicole Jenkins. Whilst the lads putting Nick's presentation up. We all know, those who aren't familiar with Nicole, and please, after the session, the speakers will have a bit of time to interact, so you can ask questions to any of the panel speakers. So, Nicole, you're... And the shirts, if you want a shirt, see Michael.
Okay, so yeah, as Kim mentioned, Nicole Jenkins, Workforce Engagement Manager for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander staff. Again, I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners, the Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to Aboriginal people here with us today. Look, I know Olga didn't want me to mention this, but I need to mention that I'm here because of Olga's vision. When Olga was working for Red Cross, she pushed to have a role as part of Red Cross, which is the position that I'm actually in. And interesting enough, when I went to Darwin in one of those first few months, I hadn't met Olga before, but I'd heard about her many times when I first started. And so I sought to have a meeting with Olga to find out what her vision was for this role, even though she was no longer with us. So I really was keen to understand what she planned on doing. And so we had a chat, and hopefully I'm still on that path. So thanks. So that's just some of our deadly staff up there. So look, what I want to talk about is we obviously have an employment strategy here, which we've touched on already. So I've been here for 3 years now, and it has been a bit of a long path, and I think we're making some really good gains, and we still have a long way to go in many respects as well. So initially, I guess my perspective and my take on this position was that we needed to have increased senior representation in the organisation. I think we talk about having, kids coming into organisations and that they're going to be our future leaders. But I also think that for someone young to come into the organisation, that they need to be able to look up and see Aboriginal people in senior roles so that they can see that there's actually an opportunity and a career pathway for them. I also think it's really important that when we have Aboriginal staff in the organisation, that we need to be able to link those staff up with each other. We have 144 Aboriginal staff spread across the country. And those staff want to know what's going on in other communities and what's going on with other mob. Obviously, we wanted to increase our staff numbers. I think when I started, there was around 90 staff, and it's kind of gone up and down over the last few years. And also, it's really important to continue to develop Aboriginal staff once they're in the organisation so that we retain the good people that we have here. And so a couple of things that we've done to date is we've actually developed a Respect newsletter, which Kerry Klim has been putting out every month. And this is around linking up our Aboriginal staff. And so anyone can access this on the wiki, but hopefully all Aboriginal staff here today, every month or when this newsletter comes out, gets an email about the newsletter talking about what's happening in community, what's happening on a national and on a state level. As already mentioned, we have cultural competency training. And Michael mentioned that, yes, it's L&D, so it's non-Aboriginal staff partnered up with our Aboriginal staff to actually co-facilitate cultural competency training. I've been part of delivering 3 in Victoria so far, and we have another one on the 10th of December. So hopefully states and territories will be doing the same. And if you're interested in attending, which all staff are expected to, then get in contact with your local L&D consultant to find out when the next training's happening. Vic leadership team. So we actually did a Victorian local leadership program here last year, and so what we discovered was that everyone was interested and keen to get more Aboriginal people into the organisation, but when you quiz people as to why, people weren't identifying roles or targeting Aboriginal people. There was a whole myriad of reasons as to why that wasn't happening. And so what we thought we'd do is pull together all the leadership team in the Victorian State Office and go through some of those challenges so that we can break down some of those barriers. And I'd like to also acknowledge Tony here today, who was leading that, the ED in Victoria, and if it wasn't for Tony, then we wouldn't have got as far as we did. And I think we started off with 1 Aboriginal staff member part-time in Victoria, and we got up to 10. So there was 10 Aboriginal staff now, and that's in a 12-month period. The idea is the process we went around engaging with the hiring managers and the leadership team, that we actually now engage with other leadership teams in other states and territories. And we've just started to roll that out in the Carlton office with national managers as well. I guess another part of it is, it's irrelevant if you have a strategy, if your HR policies don't align with what the rest of the organisation is trying to achieve. And so I sit in HR, and I'm working with HR now to ensure that the current policies we have are actually adapted so that they acknowledge the Aboriginal staff that we have. Liz mentioned leave, and so that was probably one of the first things we did when I came on board, was to make sure that our bereavement leave was open to Aboriginal staff for extended family. So a couple of other things. I guess when I'm talking about senior staff, I'm also concerned or interested in ensuring that we have pathways for young people as well. And so this year, the first time, we're taking on some interns through career trackers. 2 are starting next week on Monday, and 2 weeks ago we sent a young Aboriginal university student to East Timor for 3 months under the AVID program, which is the first time that's happened, and we're hoping that next year we'll send 10 or 15 Aboriginal university students all around the world. And actually, I'm getting the wind up as well. I guess just just a personal reflection. We had a human resource leadership team meeting on Tuesday, Wednesday this week. And so I've been in the organisation for 3 years, and initially I was reporting into Head of Strategy and then came over to HR in its entirety. And it was really encouraging for me at that meeting that all the HR managers in states and territories had a goal in their PRD around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employment and retention. And so that was encouraging for me, and it should be encouraging for every other Aboriginal person here today, that's now on everyone's agenda. Where are we up to? So just some quick information about stats. So currently we have 144 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff employed in the organisation, which is 5.2%. I think when I started it was closer to 2.5%. And another part of the work that we've been doing is making sure that Aboriginal staff are employed at a comparative level to non-Aboriginal staff. So a couple of years ago when we had an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander forum in Brisbane, a few Aboriginal staff got up and said that they were employed on casual maximum term basis, and they didn't think that was fair. And so what we did when we came back to Melbourne was have a look at the stats around how our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander staff were employed compared to non-Aboriginal staff. And it was actually quite eye-opening that majority of our Aboriginal staff were either maximum term or casual compared to non-Aboriginal staff being ongoing. We're actually slowly turning that around, as you can see. So in July 2013, there were only 34% of Aboriginal staff ongoing, and as of today, 66% of our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander staff are employed in ongoing roles. We still have some work to do on that, but we'll still be pushing through and ensuring that there is, we are employed comparatively to all staff. And I guess one of the key thing is, when we're talking about employing Aboriginal people, is we want to get Aboriginal people across the organisation. So in finance, in marketing, in IT, and so the goal is, like we've already said, an Aboriginal person doesn't come to the organisation and the expert on everything, but Aboriginal people come to the organisation with a whole lot of skills, and it's not just about working in community. It's HR skills, it's accounting skills, it's IT skills, and we need to embrace those and provide those opportunities. So I'll just finish. I missed the talk yesterday. Someone was talking about Ali and they found him quite inspirational. But what I took from the last session I heard yesterday is that, forgive me if I get this wrong, but he was basically saying that if he didn't see people in the, was it Western Region football team, then you know, you weren't going to attract him either. It's the same with Red Cross. If Aboriginal people don't see Aboriginal people in Red Cross, in all roles, then Aboriginal people are not going to be interested in coming. So, you know, I think that's relevant here. And also, from the youth perspective, they were talking about cultural change, and this is also cultural change. And it's also giving up some power, and we are doing that through our leadership team, but I think that's stuff that we can continue to push. And considering my manager Chris is here, I better mention that we've that we actually won the Australian Human Resource Institute award in Indigenous employment about 3 weeks ago. You've probably all been bombarded with the emails, so you know I think that's evidence to show that we are on the right track. And I'm surprised Chris isn't running down with the trophies, but they're here somewhere. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Our next speaker is Miss Olga Havnen. She is the CEO of the Danila Dilba Health Service in Darwin. She has held a range of senior public and non-government sectors role in her long career in Indigenous affairs, including the Deputy Director of the Northern Land Council, Principal Policy Advisor with the Office of Indigenous Policy in the Northern Territory Department of Chief Minister, Manager of Indigenous Programs or Manager at the Fred Hollows Foundation, and the Head of Indigenous Strategies, Australian Red Cross. Please warm welcome Olga to the microphone.
Oh no, she doesn't have one. So just put the slide back up. Yeah.
No, I don't have a pen. I just grab some water. Oh, lovely.
Been too
Thanks.
many of your speeches.
First of all, good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time and the interest in coming to listen to this particular session today. I also would acknowledge the traditional owners and want to acknowledge the rest of my panel members as well. Nicole, I think you've just done an amazing job at Red Cross with your recruitment strategy, so fantastic, well done. But that's also a reflection of everybody else that works in Red Cross, because you can't do it on your own. Just very quickly about myself, I'm Western Islander, Central Australia. I grew up in Tennant Creek, born there, raised there. Pretty tough town for anybody that's ever been through Tennant Creek. You'd kind of wonder why on earth anybody would want to be there. But let me tell you, I think that town in particular has enormous levels of capacity and resilience for all of the terrible difficulties and challenges that people face. I think in some ways, having grown up in a town like that probably has been the making of me. Not to mention my mother and my grandparents as well. The topic of this particular session was around closing the gap, and I guess for many of you this week you would have heard and seen the Productivity Commission's report. This is the 6th report. It's a national report. It looks in very close detail about a whole range of headline indicators about where we're tracking or not. Pleasing to note that things like school retention, housing and some of the health measures are starting to show positive improvement and change. However, there's evidence of no improvement in things like the NAPLAN results, family and community violence. And then even more distressingly, I think the thing that really shocked me was to learn that statistics to do with self-harm, incarceration and juvenile detention have all worsened quite significantly. I think if anyone was watching those SBS documentaries that have been to air this week, it kind of created for me a bit of a mental image about the state of Aboriginal affairs. And I guess that image that comes to mind to me is that of an elusive being. It's somehow this strange foreigner forever beyond the realm of most Australians. And furthermore, I think that Aboriginal people have been subjected to a whole range of different responses at different times over the course of our history. Everything from being ignored, repelled, excluded, captured, beaten, controlled, cursed and abused. Too much of it, I think, has been about doing things to and for Aboriginal people, despite it being done with the best of intentions for our own good. But in all of that sense of being an elusive being, perhaps sometimes it's almost feeling like being the fugitive, Because whilst, the rest of the society and government and public policy seem hell-bent on doing things to us and for us, I think they fail to acknowledge that quite often Aboriginal people look back at the rest of Australian society with a sense of frustration and resentment, a resentment because of the unmet expectations that somehow something will eventually lead to positive change, that things will be better, that the unfinished business that Pat Dodson talks about will somehow be addressed. After so many failures of public policy, be it the missions, the reserves, assimilation, and even policies such as self-management and self-determination, we have had in more recent times policies of government intervention and, I would argue, coercion. I just want you to think for a moment, perhaps it's time for us to have a radical new approach, because the alarming statistics that we've seen in this recent OID report, particularly in the mental health and suicide, suggests to me that perhaps unwittingly there is dreadful harm being done in the pursuit of trying to improve outcomes. Is it possible that there's a different way to bring about positive and life-affirming change? That a vision for a better life and well-being for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people has, I think, been obscured by the relentless battering of our messengers, unless, of course, you happen to be Noel Pearson or Warren Mundine and the like. Is it just possible that we've pushed the answers that are sought even deeper into obscurity through the frantic complexity of the search by government to reform us? In their attempts to unravel the knot of this wicked problem, I fear we're in danger of drawing the knot tighter than ever. I wonder whether this is a possible explanation for these appalling statistics of self-harm and violence. That what is being done and how it's being done perhaps causes or contributes to an increased sense of hopelessness and despair. So you might well ask, what's the alternative? Where's the solutions? And what can Red Cross do about it? Personally, I think the answer lies in capacity building or capacity development. But however, just a quick word of caution here. Don't go rushing off to the library of sort of training manuals thinking that capacity development is just about training, because quite clearly it's not. I think capacity development and capacity building in our domestic context has much to learn from that which is done by Red Cross here and elsewhere in the international sphere. And for anybody that takes the time to read about capacity building and development, I just want to explain quickly that most of the research and the academic sort of papers would suggest that you need to build capacity on 3 levels. That is individual and family, at an organisational level, and at a whole of community level. I think there's been a lot of focus and attention, particularly on the individual level, about building the skills and capabilities of individuals and families, but almost no attention paid to the building of capacity of our organisations. If anything, I think our organisations have actually faced an onslaught of devastation just because of the more competitive tendering processes that are now there, for government funding and so on. However, in just thinking about this work of organisational strengthening, I think you need to sort of take a bit of a step back and think about the conceptual framework of how some of this might be done. From my perspective, I think what's really important is that our organisations need to understand how the world works, the real world, in the sense of who we're competing with, who we work with, how society and governments operate as a whole. If our organisations don't recognise and understand that complex operating environment, then the chances are we end up with organisations feeling like they're victims of government kind of control and management. And in fact, in reflecting on this and thinking about it just in the last few days, it's become very clear to me that many of our organisations have been threatened by the way in which public funds, and particularly what was Indigenous-specific funding, has now been opened up more widely to the NGO and, in some cases, the corporate sector. And quite often what I'm hearing from our organisations is a sense of victimhood. Somehow all of this stuff is happening to us and to our organisations, and that we have no capacity to respond to that. I think where we need to get our organisations to be is to have a sense of maturity, a sense of ownership and responsibility about recognising what it is that we can do in our organisations to shape and influence policy discussions and outcomes. It's about our organisational attitude. I think we need to have the confidence, skills and abilities to act in a way that engages with funders and decision makers. Whatever the history of oppression, marginalisation or circumstances that we as individuals or organisations have experienced, I think we need to know that attitudes are so important in terms of forming the basis as to how we can affect organisational change and action. It really isn't just a question about what's fair or just. It's just recognising the reality that this is the way things are and this is how the world works. Too often the focus, I think, in capacity building is on the concrete and tangible things. That is, what are the resources we have, what people do we have, what dollars do we have, and it looks at things like organisational structure. I think what we've really lost sight of is the incredibly important role that organisations play in building civil society. Those organisations have to have a vision of what the future can be, to be really clear about its vision and purpose, and to understand that without that vision and purpose, we're unlikely to have coherent strategies that lead us to actual action. I think what's interesting is that the Red Cross Strategic Plan says that it doesn't seek to replace or compete with Aboriginal organisations, but I think the strategy is a little bit silent on what you can do to help strengthen organisational capacity. There's much that can be done, in terms of planning, strategic plans, business plans, ops plans and the likes. There's much that could be done to support systems development, policies, procedures, etc. You could help work on funding submissions with your partner organisations. Skills development and training, particularly around reporting and accountability frameworks. Red Cross has existing capacity to do this work through your staff, through volunteers and through members. And I believe that this work would actually be a really good demonstration of what could be a genuine and true partnership, and that is creating organisations that have the potential and the capacity to bring about change. Again, a word of caution, don't rush into it, take time to think about and prepare properly if you're going to get into this space. Learn the lessons from your own experience, particularly working in the international sphere. Learn and understand really genuinely what's meant by organisational strengthening. Don't jump into just the doing of things like needs assessments and audits, etc., because I think otherwise you're going to lose sight of those sort of less tangible things that I think make a real difference to our organisations. You have to facilitate processes that both enables and allow organisations to figure out for themselves, one, first of all, where they're at. For example, are they a small, nascent organisation trying to get off the ground? Or is the organisation a mature one in terms of years, but really underdeveloped in knowing its own strengths and capabilities? You need to know and understand that organisation's history. How has that organisation culture developed? And is that culture a strength or a weakness? I think we need to look for where we can find good development practitioners who can help do this work with you effectively, because I actually believe that Red Cross is uniquely placed to lead a major paradigm shift together with Aboriginal organisations. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. We will now open up for questions from the floor for about 15-20 minutes, and then I'll just summarise the session and we'll go for lunch. First question. All right. You just want to stand up and...
So yeah, I wish to acknowledge Indigenous people, both past and present, and the elders from my own cultural background. I'm a Maori woman, I'm a proud Ngāpuhi from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you for allowing me to come and live in your land. I've been here for some years. I'm a social worker and I'm based at Logan in Queensland. And what always sort of alarms me still is the fear that most people have from your fellas. You know, like, if I make friends with an Aboriginal family, what's it going to do? How do I do that? I've heard it in this summit this weekend. How do I make friends with Aboriginal people? I think go and make love with them. Interpret that how you wish. Have some fun. Eat. Sleep with them. You know, really get involved with the communities. But I have to bring up, that I walked out this morning when the man from Geneva was speaking, because it comes from the top as well. You know, he was somewhat amused that women in Somalia said that you're late and that they had mobile phones. You know, so the interpretation is still at the top. It's not right. And so we have much to do. I'm cast from an Indigenous mother and I'm cast from a white daddy. And I had the best of both worlds. And I'm open to sharing. I will stand next to you. I won't stand behind you. I won't stand in front of you. But I would like to see one day before I pass in this country that when you get, for example, you know, that young fellow called Prince William coming on your land, then your elders greet him. He doesn't go through any doors until he's welcomed and accepted, just like we do back in the little country in New Zealand. Good luck to you. I'm here for you, and all the best.
Thank you. Anyone? No? Thank you for the acknowledgement. Very nice. Melissa Gibson, you want to stand?
Sure.
Please.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much. This has been an amazing panel. Actually, I think probably the best panel. My question is to Liz and Nick. I know that Aboriginal people are not a homogenous group, but are there things that Red Cross should be really focusing on? I know that we've got the recruitment and retention plan, but I guess I'm from a services background. Are there things we really need to know, like a top 3 things that we should be doing? And can I say, I totally get the thing the guy was talking about yesterday. You've got to see Aboriginal faces to be drawn in, but I'm just really interested in if you think you might have like a top 3 that we could be doing.
Top 3. Firstly, you know, utilising the resources that we've got with Aboriginal people, and the branding, you know, making sure that is actually connected and in our community, so that our mob can actually see that you are employer friendly. And I know numbers in Vic have gone from 3 to 10 in 12 months. So that is actually happening with the links that Nick's provided with community as well. What other things? You go.
Look, I guess the key for me is, like I mentioned before, is actually acknowledging that Aboriginal people have skills in a number of different areas, and regardless of where you're employing people, you'll find an Aboriginal person with those skills, whether they're achieved through a university or whether it's something that someone's achieved through life experience. I think we need to become a bit more savvy around recognising what skills are relevant for Red Cross, and it's not necessarily a PhD. It's about those skills that people get on the ground. And if you're growing up in a community and you're supporting extended family that have, you know, people in jail or mental health issues, or someone that's committed suicide, then they're going to be much more highly qualified than someone that's done a PhD in community programs. So, you know, I think we just need to be a little bit more savvy about how we, you know, how we recruit and how we think about the applicants that come through the door.
And I'm Chris Kwong. Just have a quick question. While listening to all of our panellists speak today, ideas are flying through my head in terms of the potential as well, in terms of if Australian Red Cross really gets involved in addressing these various issues. There are, in some ways, much to be gained for Red Cross, in the sense that as this humanitarian space becomes increasingly competitive, as we try and recruit new people to be a part of the movement, we need to define ourselves in an Australian context of what makes us different. And listening to you guys, I think there are a huge potential there, both in terms of a historical nature, and, you know, we can only think of, you know, opportunities that are going to come up in terms of the Recognise campaign, for example, and how we might be able to play roles in that. So I was wondering if the panellists might be able to share some, maybe 1 or 2 things that you think whereby if Australian Red Cross really gets involved in this area, how it will actually raise the profile of Red Cross as well.
Who'd like to start with that one?
Thank you.
Just in my personal view, and two things, coming into Red Cross and seeing, being exposed to what the potential Red Cross does have, it really surprised me in terms of the potential it does have, and particularly in this area, seeing how other organisations, whether it be government or non-government, over the years gone into the, delivering services to Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, and the past, the failures that they've stumbled on, and obviously we've gone into that space, and we've stumbled a couple of times, that's for sure. There's no doubt about that. But I think Red Cross, I would like to see my time while I'm in Red Cross, I would like to really see Red Cross. Yeah, we talked about, those things about the controversy about reinventing itself. And part of this reinvention is about us as an organisation setting a different conversation in service delivery land around how we deal with, how we engage, how we partner, how we build capacity, how we support and walk with people. I think we've got a great opportunity to do that in the next 5 years. That's my honest feeling of it. Certainly that's where I'm going to work towards. And obviously it's something, a drive that I have. And as I say, I can only control what I'm doing now in Cairns, and that's my focus. And it's about doing that bit first. But as an organisation, I think we've got a huge potential there, and Red Cross is fast becoming, as I say, it's young in this area, but it's funny. It's in my way of thinking, it's maturing quickly in this area too, in the sense of what it's trying to do. And we still got a journey. Don't get me wrong, but I think if we keep setting the course. But the main thing about the organisation, we all have this when we're internally, is to be clear about what we want to do, what sort of partnership or relationship we want with Aboriginal people or Torres Strait Islander people. And if we're clear about that, then when we're talking out there, they're very clear about what they're wanting from us. So yeah, I honestly believe we've got that potential in us, and I certainly, whilst I sit and have the privilege of being in this organisation, that certainly will be my drive.
Thanks. Just to make a couple of quick comments on that one, because I think your question is actually a really interesting one. First thing I'd say, just as a general observation, is that funding and the availability of it quite often drives what organisations do. The second comment, and that's not to say you shouldn't take the money, by the way, I think it's just being clear about what you take and what you don't. The second comment I would make would be that there's a lot of conversation always about organisations, about brand, reputation and profile, and again, really interesting elements and things to think about seriously, because if you're not a credible organisation, then it absolutely impedes your ability to do things. But to me, I think the most important question you should be asking is, what's the legacy you want to leave behind? My view is that Red Cross ought to be what I would describe as an enabler organisation, not doing things to or for people, but actually working with them in a way that enables people to take control of their own lives and their own destiny.
And I'll add, sorry to go back to employment, I guess that's my space, but we're talking about Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people here, but I think, and we're right when it comes to program dollars and you chase the dollars, but I think there is something we can do that doesn't include money, and that's by having a diverse organisation from the board down. And so it's not just about Aboriginal people, it's about the community that we represent, that we look the same internally. And I think if we do that, then things will change for a lot of people experiencing disadvantage.
Two more. So the young lady and Eamon. Oh, sorry, Tony.
Sorry, Evan. Thank you to the panel for sharing your wonderful thoughts with us today. My question is more around engaging Aboriginal volunteers. This has come up in conversation quite a bit over the last couple of days in a couple of workshops I've been involved in, and that's been identified as a particular barrier for us. And I was just wondering if you could share some thoughts on recruiting and retaining Aboriginal volunteers, and especially Michael, with your experience in your region, if you could talk to us about some strategies that have worked for you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and this is something that in the 2 years that I've been in Cairns, and I don't say this without any malice in terms of when I first walked into the Cairns office, I sort of scratched my head and thought, oh, geez, what have I got myself into here? But that was more about the culture of the place, and obviously predominantly, non-Indigenous, middle-aged, non-Indigenous, and look, it was unfortunate, but it had a real paternalistic culture about it, and obviously with the guests, or the people that we're engaging with Red Cross, a large number of those were obviously well over 95% of the guests or clients that come into we engage with are from Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander communities. So we set about a course of changing that, and like what Nicole was saying about getting the cultural diversity. So we really changed the look of the place, and with people in terms of young people, females, males, different people from cultural backgrounds. So we've got Colombians, we've got French people, we've got Germans, we've got and of course we've got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I'd like to acknowledge one of our fellows here, and I will embarrass him. He's a very shy man, but Victor Louis. Victor, could you just stand up, please? Yeah. And Victor, when we opened the new centre, and it was about trying to get volunteers, and it's a hard. Aboriginal people and Torres Strait people, they've been volunteering for a long, long time, and we just haven't recognised it in a volunteering. It's been in the realms within their communities, and there is people, and it's like probably think we always try to, when we want to volunteer, we've got to be very clear about why we want them to volunteer, and obviously we're starting to, in Cairns, we're starting to reflect that. So when Aboriginal people are coming into our centre now, they're seeing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander volunteers. So it's been, for the Cairns space, it was probably relatively easy because of the fact of the numbers, and then people wanting to be involved, and so it really was a set out to make sure we do get those people, and a lot of it was like word of mouth too, because obviously people do get around and talk about people doing volunteering in different areas, and so it's great to see now that we have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander volunteers, and I would hope to think that that journey continues with them and they become staff members for me.
Oh, yeah, one more. Emin? I won't call you Gammon because you know what that means.
I do, thank you, Kim. I also want to acknowledge the panel. I think it's been a terrific conversation, and I feel very fortunate to be here and being part of it, and particularly to Liz and for Olga coming in and giving us their time today. I think that's particularly special. My question was, again, about employment and engagement, and I was going to address the question perhaps to Liz, but I'm happy for anyone in the panel to consider the question. But I thought, Liz, you have a particular external lens to the process, and your organisation, as does WISE and other organisations, has built a particularly strong relationship with our HR department. So I'm interested in the external environment, and what are the attributes or the draw cards for Red Cross as an organisation, and how did we manage to increase the number of people from candidates to actual employees? What were the positives and the benefits from your perspective? What are the areas that we might need to develop? And is there a role, going back to the previous question, is there a role for volunteering in that lens? Sorry, if you can go at one.
And I failed to mention that I do work at Korin Gamadji Institute, part of the Richmond Football Club, but it's partnering with providers that do things like us. I'm not saying we're all, deadly and all too good, but we have pathway programs for kids between 14 and 17-year-olds that come in, that are doing really well at school, and come in and do leadership programs. So we're working with them. We then have the employment program that comes in that helps to assist in that transition to to VCE or to school or work experience, and partnering with all the corporates or all community organisations that have strategies around engagement. Some of what other questions was there? There was positives and benefits. The positives and the reason why I think we do what we do is because we want to make sure that our people are included and to give the chance that I guess, my mum and my grandmother didn't have. So, and if everyone can just share a little piece of that and a part of that and bring that through, I think it's fantastic. So, did I answer that in a way? It's more about the engagement with external partners as well, yeah, and having good partners. And I heard this yesterday as well. Select your providers carefully.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try summarise the session. Just give me a bit of time. I now know Liz Allen. Liz, typical Aboriginal person, a woman, has a very distinguished sporting career. You had a very distinguished sporting career. No. So you're the wrong Liz Allen then? Wrong one. Oh, okay. No? That's Belinda, okay. What the presenters provided today from their own experience and lived experience, many lenses within Australian Red Cross. I'd like to also, just firstly, before I do the wrap up, is acknowledge Michael sitting at the front, because it's great to have somebody like Michael actually sitting not just at the front, but his leadership across Australian Red Cross and working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, his leadership shown to the other states and territories, and particularly with the executive directors. I think you guys are very important to meeting the needs and aspirations of our communities across the country. The many lenses, as Michael presented, from a regional, national perspective, and we are actually not only talking the talk through our many documentations and policies in which we've created, thanks for the efforts and the creation and the courage of people like Olga, Havnen, who worked the courageous views of past senior people working within Red Cross. But we're not only walking the walk, talking the talk through our policies, we're also walking the walk. And Michael gave us that insight into what we're actually doing. And there's many other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working in telechat or teleyarn and others I see within the room who make a very small contribution, but from an Australian Red Cross perspective, we are the leaders, I like to believe, I believe, and I've been involved in Aboriginal affairs for 20 odd years in various roles, and it is practical reconciliation. Australian Red Cross is the leading agency, as far as I'm concerned, in bringing this wonderful nation together. I mean, the target approach for employment of Aboriginal people being 6%, we're sitting, as Nicole said, we're sitting at about 5.2. I had the privilege of meeting with Canberra bureaucrats and ministers' advisors with Carey and Barbara. They were astonished that our engagement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is not just 4%, it's 6%. And I come from a background where it's pretty political, it's very in your face. And to come to an organisation, what I've seen the literacy yous have produced, we've produced, it's wonderful. It gives new life. And Australian Red Cross does provide that humanitarian life. It respects the individual, it respects the dignity of individuals, and importantly builds and sustains communities so they can equip to disasters in the future. Liz talked about employment framework. Nick talked about the internal policies, planning and processes, and involvement. And I think one of the things Nick did in her presentation talked about the importance of actually staying together, walking the journey. It does take time. It took a period of 3 years. And that was 3 years of a lot of hard work when we're doing our other core businesses in regarding providing assistance on the international stage. But responding to disasters in Victoria and New South Wales and South Australia with the fires, and lately in those 3 years, the floods in Queensland. Olga, it's always inspirational to listen to Olga. That's why some of you might have seen on this side, I poured a glass of water. One of the things I like to do is when you do have aspirations for people like Olga, you actually need to not just hear but observe them in their presentations. And I know for a fact every time I see Olga presents, she always needs that glass of water. Again, working with Aboriginal Torres Strait people, it's not just about writing papers. One of our greatest strengths for 40, 60,000 years is our observation. Either he or she is a good person, or he or she is a flash person. And I can say that within Australian Red Cross, under the leadership of Michael and Robert and Michael Raper, that we are producing a lot of literacy. A practice manual will be delivered to all Red Cross staff. I know some EDs or advisory boards have seen it and made commentary. That is fantastic. We are rolling out the learning, the cultural competency, which Michael talked about and Liz talked about. And I'd like to acknowledge Mel Godbar and Chris and my good little friend there, Kath, and all the, as Michael White pointed out, being in a room talking about cultural competency with a non-Aboriginal person is just fantastic. You would not get that in any other organisation in this country. And that's why I go back to the point of us being the lead agency or lead NGO in this country in regards to bringing practical reconciliation to this country. Olga's new approach, for some of you who've been involved in the writing of the literacy of the place-based, the collective impact, you made reference to civil societies and how do we get there. Again, it's interesting that there is, whilst we've got people from outside Red Cross who was in Red Cross, still carrying that same message of bringing peace, harmony and understanding. And I can't be inspired more than what the young lady spoke about, and particularly the presentation she gave about the young lady from the Marshall Islands. How powerful was that? And I'm a male, but I'm a mummy's boy. So, and these days I'm a grandfather. Some of the questions from the floor were quite interesting, I think, no doubt. So I should, Liz, Chris, it's question. You know, the involvement of volunteers, the involvement of where do we go now? I think the path Australian Red Cross is on, we're on at the moment, is good. It's not fast, it's not slow. It's actually engaging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. And we'll have many of our challenges. So with that summary, hopefully I wrapped everybody up. But we are, and because we're breaking for lunch, please talk to your colleagues about this session. Yeah? What a wonderful bloke Michael White is. And these three powerful Aboriginal ladies, and we've got powerful Aboriginal ladies. I'd like to acknowledge some of our elders here. Someone's putting their hand up there. You too, bro. But also acknowledge Rachel Smell at the back there as the co-chair for the National Aboriginal Torres Strait Island team is also in the back there. Please, non-Aboriginal staff, if you want to engage Aboriginal people, talk to us. We're not that scary. I know, look at the big fella at the back. And the two guys to his side. I mean, they're wonderful guys. We're not afraid, but just in conclusion, a new approach, it's an exciting era, not just for Australian Red Cross, but I think for all Australians. And the challenge of getting volunteers on board, as Michael pointed out, we've always been there. But we call it an obligation we have to one another. It's not a volunteering in its true sense. It's an obligation. And I think all Australians have, and particularly, have an obligation to be volunteers of Australian Red Cross. So enjoy your lunch and rest of the day.